Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to Season 5 of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. We are already in Q1 of 2025 as this episode airs. And 2025 has already given us a lot to think about and to keep up with changes in the U.S. political administrations and many layoffs and ups and downs in corporate America and globally. And that doesn't even take into account anything that you're dealing with personally, whether that's a career change or a family situation. Your cognitive load, or what's on your mind in the day-to-day, your cognitive load is most likely at an all-time high. And you are listening to this podcast most likely because you want to become an even better leader, to grow your career, or to have more impact in your job and life. When your cognitive load is high, it's harder to make progress on all of those things. It's also probably harder to build boundaries. And in the last few months, I've personally found that I have been able to be more present and to do more of the things that I need to do because of my consistency in grounding myself in my values. Your values are truly a compass for you, especially in times of high cognitive load. Especially when you can't control all the things you want to control. For me, my values have brought me clarity in a time that has personally been one of the most difficult seasons to navigate. When I go back to my values, which are family, growth, development, achievement, and advocacy and balance, I can make better decisions that not only benefit me, but benefit my family, my team, my community. And in times of uncertainty, in times of ambiguity, in times of complexity, how can you use your values to navigate your way through for you and your team? I hope the tools that I've been talking about over the last 4 years of this podcast can help equip you to lead within and through the uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. Now is a great time to be that consistency for your team or people that you can influence in your life. Get clarity on your values and use those to make the small and big decisions. There are a ton of tools on my website, thecatchgroup.com. A lot of these tools are free. Download the free values worksheet to get started. There's also a free companion workbook to my book, Values First, on my website, as well with actionable tools that you can use for yourself and your team. Your leadership belongs here. It always has, especially now. So without further delay, let's take a listen to our first episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast for Season 5. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. I'm excited to share my conversation with Wendy Gonzalez. Wendy Gonzalez is the CEO of Sama, which is a leader in providing high-quality training data to power AI technology and is used by leading technology companies such as Walmart, Google, NVIDIA, GM, and Getty. Under Wendy's leadership, Sama has placed on the Inc. 5000 list as one of America's fastest growing private companies for the past 4 years. She has also been recognized by the Globee Awards for Women in Business, the Titan Awards for Women in Business, and the Stevie Awards for Women in Business due to her leadership and Sama's growth. Prior to taking on the role of CEO, Wendy spent 5 years as Sama as COO and is an active board member of the Leila Jana Foundation. As CEO, she is one of the few female leaders within the male-dominated AI industry. With 2 decades of managerial and technology leadership experience, Wendy is an executive passionate about building high-performing, high-functioning teams that develop and scale innovative, impactful technology. A thought leader in the AI and tech industry, Wendy has undertaken several conference and speaking opportunities, including the Women Tech Network, UpTech Network, Lean Startup Week, Digital Trends Live, Forbes Books Radio, and Tech First. In my conversation with Wendy, we talked about her career story and a pivotal moment in her career where she sought values alignment with her personal values to ensure that she could make the impact in the world that she wanted within her work. We talked about multiple leadership lessons that she's learned along the way, and she shares an exercise that she swears by. She fires herself annually to see if she would hire herself back. She explains why she does this and how you can go through the same exercise for yourself to gain insights on your growth areas to prioritize. She also talked about how she leads her team with a servant leader mindset, which is very uncommon in the technology space. And she talks about the intentional things she does to develop her team. She gives a really great example of how she has built trust within her team and what they do to ensure that they continue to be self-aware, to avoid blind spots, and to develop themselves as a team and as individuals to meet the organization's needs and for their own career development. Wendy's story is an example of how you can intentionally build a values-aligned career, and I'm so excited for you to learn from her through this discussion. At the end of our discussion, I'll come back with a recap on how you can apply some of the lessons to your career. Let's get started. Well, I want to welcome you to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wendy.
Appreciate it, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to get to know you even more. So before we kind of dive into some of the topics that we have in mind for today, I'd love to hear more about your background, your career story. So I'd love to hear wherever you want to start.
So I am a child of immigrants. I was born in Seattle, Washington area. My dad was one of the first engineers at Boeing. He spent over 30 plus years there. But yeah, grew up in the area and stayed in the same old house my whole life. And then I went to school at the University of Washington. Proud Husky fan. But after that, I was like, I need to travel. So I actually joined Ernst& Young. Originally as an auditor, found very quickly that that was not for me. So I transitioned into management consulting and spent a decade on the road helping companies basically think about and understand how they can transform their businesses through technology. And from there, I loved the travel, but wanted to hang up my frequent flyer number and focus on where I can make more impact. So I joined a couple of public companies in IT leadership roles before I got the startup bug. So I was like, I keep getting smaller and smaller. Where can I really, really affect change? And so I co-founded an IoT startup, and that was fantastic. But somewhere along the line, I had a few kids. So I had 3 small children, and my husband and I, my partner, we just tried to figure out like how can we get more engaged in the community? Like he's a 0 generation immigrant. Like we felt very lucky that we were able to be, and raise a family here in the Silicon Valley, which is fantastic. But what about the rest of the community? Like, how do we get engaged and how do we show them how to walk the walk? So, probably like any family, we spent lots of time, volunteering, figuring out what we could do until one day we just kind of looked at each other. We're like, well, what if we made that our day job? Like, what if we actually transitioned this idea that we're passionate about walking the walk and we say, let's, pick up the trash on the road if you see it, like do your thing you need to do to make the world a better place, or leave it a little nicer than when you found it. And at that point, we flipped a coin. I won the coin toss and said maybe I should start looking for something that is more aligned with our values, basically. And then sadly, my father passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. And I was like, what am I waiting for? Like, life is way too short. And so it's a very long way of saying I ultimately left the startup I co-founded right when we were achieving success, ironically, to join a nonprofit that I felt was I was very passionate about. And ultimately, that's where I am now as the CEO. But that's how I got there. Was through kind of a life journey that started with, focusing on technology and ended with how can I leverage my experience in business and technology to make a dent in the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And tell me more about your organization now and your role and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CEO of Sama, and we are. I can share with you what we do, but I think equivalently or more importantly is the why we do it. So we are an AI data annotation and model valuation company. So we basically work with large enterprises to help them build accurate and performant AI models. But the why we do what we do is to leverage the AI economy to create jobs in underserved communities. So this idea of Sama, so Sama means equal in Sanskrit, and the idea is that there's so much incredible human talent out there, but there's simply many, many barriers to employment. So if you think about the normal way that people hire, they hire people based off of their previous experience, off of their pedigree, right? So you got to, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
graduated from this university, but what happens if you couldn't afford to go to university? What happens if, there are very few jobs in the formal sector, where you are? So that's pretty much all of sub-Saharan Africa. You lack the network and the access. So you don't even know somebody to be able to figure out how to get that job. So that's really where Salma came to bear, which is a much better way to solve poverty and to move people out of poverty isn't aid, right? It's really about financial independence. So what we should be doing is we should be figuring out how do you create jobs. And there is a lot of opportunity, in particular in the digital economy, to basically support demand that exists in other places where very few jobs exist. So we took a purposeful hiring model where we purposely hire at least 50% women. Women have some of the greatest barriers to employment. And it's well understood that when women succeed, communities succeed. They
Mm-hmm.
invest in their community and schooling. And so we're like, hey, what if we hired at least 50% women? What if we hired in underserved communities where they have there's challenges to getting jobs. And then we provide living wage full-time employment with benefits, all these other things to basically allow people to not only get digitally upskilled so they can build skills for the future. So it's about the future of work. But beyond that, jobs beget jobs. So even if you didn't have that fancy degree or the previous work experience, you go into a professional company, you get that years of experience, you've built your CV, and now you have a much greater opportunity to stay in the formal economy and have salaries and benefits, versus the informal economy, which is you show up to work, you do day labor, construction, there's no safety net, and obviously not necessarily a career. So yeah, it's a quite involved. Why do we do what we do? But it's yeah, something I'm super passionate about. And AI is incredible technology. It needs human judgment. It needs data to be annotated and supported, and so there's some good that you can do while you're building that technology.
And who do you usually partner? Are you partnering with other organizations and companies within that realm, or are you going where you want to go and where the kind of industry needs it most? Like, tell me more about that. What's that strategy like?
Yeah, so we're focused on basically on enterprises who are building AI models that, they have a lot of data that needs to be structured. So think about things like autonomous driving.
Mhm.
Before a car can learn to change lanes and brake and avoid, collisions. It needs to be able to recognize, what does a car look like? What does a human look like? What does a traffic sign look like? So when I say data annotation, it's basically structuring unstructured data,
Mm-hmm.
literally videos of and sensor data that's coming from vehicles to then outline it. So it's primarily based off of human judgment. It could also be things like we're, building a search engine, and we need to make sure that if you put in a prompt, that the answer you get back isn't gibberish, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, actually factually accurate or has the right tone or sentiment. And so we started in this space of human judgment because you don't have to have a computer science degree to get there. This is something that can be trained. So we basically build a platform. We develop training specifically to, support kind of data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hire people in at, like I said, living wages, full-time work, benefits, etc.
Awesome. And so, what does the team look like right now?
Now we have a little over 3,000 people in East
Mhm.
Africa. So I'm proud to say that we've moved almost 70,000 people out of poverty.
Mm.
So since our founding, with the people we've hired and the dependents they support. And yeah, and then we have a relatively small, looks like a regular startup engineering teams in
Mhm.
Canada and Costa Rica, some engineers in Kenya. And then there are a handful of us like myself that are based in the Bay Area.
And so you mentioned kind of the career shift and pivot to be more values aligned. Can you tell me a little bit more about what your core values are and how that's impacted not just your career, but even your leadership style and how you approach work?
Absolutely. Well, where I kind of came here had a lot to do with sort of the personal values that I had,
Hmm.
and then I can maybe talk about how that translated into the values that we try to espouse as a company.
Yeah.
But for me, it all was about agency and opportunity. You know, I think back to like affirmative action in the 70s, and I know in today's world, like I know some people like that term, some people hate that term, but at the end of the day, we aren't necessarily represented. The people that you see in, whether it's, executives, leaders, people's in position of power or otherwise, right? Like it's fairly stacked. It's not super diverse, right? And
Right.
one of the things I think is incredibly, incredibly important, especially in technology, is this technology is ubiquitous. Okay. It's not like if you are a person of a certain, a certain gender or ethnicity or in a different part of the world that somehow you were immune to this technology. So I first, really believe that everybody deserves a seat at the table to be able to be part of this world-changing technology and to make it more representative. So I do think that's important. Imagine if you have the building blocks of the most transformative technology and it's all made by the same few people sitting in a garage in Silicon Valley, right? Like
Yeah.
that would be pretty challenging for that representative. So I think it's important to have that level of diversity. The second is that work for us, I mentioned when I started, you asked me, well, where did I start? Well, yeah, I was a child of immigrants,
Hmm.
right? Work has meant a lot to us. My husband was zero generation. He was the first person in his family when he immigrated from Mexico to ever go to college, right? Like it's been transformative, the opportunities that can be created. And most people just want that shot, right?
Yeah.
To be able to have that opportunity. So this idea that we could level the playing field and create both an opportunity where we're leveraging, all the incredible human talent and diverse and amazing human capital that's out there, and actually solve some pretty big issues like poverty that poverty causes, right? Like,
Yeah.
everything from clean drinking water to, avoidable maternal deaths to, you name it, all really ultimately stem from poverty and not having this sort of financial independence to be able to, invest where you want to invest in building your own communities. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with aid, but you can, you know, donate, a mosquito net, or you can basically help build an ecosystem where hospitals and doctors and mosquito net manufacturers can be there, in location. So that was really that value, was, hey, independence, agency, and creating opportunity. So that's where I'd say a lot of the values come from. But the other thing that really transforms this, especially when we come to technology, is that technology is inevitable, right? Like we're not going to bury our heads in the sand. I mean, there's, We don't also have like fax machines and stuff like that. So I think it's a terrible example. That probably says how old I am, but you can look at technology as a way to transform and drive productivity. You can also look at it as a way that oh, hey, it reduces jobs, it could have these impacts, but we're never going to be moving backwards. We're always going to be moving forward. So how do you really embrace all these incredible advancements and make sure that along the way you can do some good. You can set up this technology in a way that's actually beneficial for humans. And so I'm a big believer that, we can do both. We can advance innovation and incredible technology, but we can also benefit as a society.
Yeah.
That was super long-winded. I'm sorry.
I no, please, I love it. So as you shifted from your and used your personal values to shift your career, what was that like for you personally in terms of the impact you make, your own fulfillment, the needs of your family? Like, walk me through that, the kind of pivotal moment where you said, "Hey, can't this really be aligned, and should it be?" And what was that like, and what does it continue to be like as you're tackling all these things now?
It's so interesting the way you asked that question because not often do people ask that. So I think first of all, it's a great question. Uh, but it's very interesting. Like one of my philosophies in leadership and in hiring and diversity is that of course, you have a degree, you've got work experience and all those things, but I think it's kind of difficult to, be one person the rest of your life and then be somebody different at work, right? We're all a culmination, in other words, of our experiences, right?
Yeah.
Whether for me it's as a daughter, sister, you name it, like we all have these different experiences. Just like, I came from a consulting background, which is different, and then I did product, and then I did, so all these are kind of the things that we can bring to the table. And so this idea that I could converge and say, wow, these are things I really believe pretty deeply in on a personal level, but then also I can combine them with work was both incredibly liberating to be able to go like, wow, like I can kind of not quite wear my heart on my sleeve, but like I can sort of come to this with all of these views and align them. But it's also made it probably one of the most difficult
Mm,
jobs I've ever had, as well as I probably felt I don't want to say pressure or responsibility by
mm,
far than any job I've ever had. It's like, okay, we're trying to do, this is a very difficult thing to run a double bottom line business, triple bottom line because we have sustainability goals too, but it's difficult to do that when there are lots of forces that sometimes could both compete and conflict, right?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been really interesting, but I would say from a value standpoint, I think it's really interesting. It's definitely led to, I think, a culture where I'm guessing if you probably talk to anybody who works at our company, most people like to travel. They're usually pretty interested in, adventure, right? Because we're a global company, they're like, oh yeah, working in Africa would be super cool, right? And so sometimes what we do and the values also drive a culture as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned that pretty big career pivot when you aligned your values to your work. What other big pivots have you had or just big lessons learned? You mentioned just a minute ago with that values aligned work comes maybe more tension points or more pressure. Is there any one specific example that you might want to share in terms of lessons learned from any of that?
oh, how much time do we have? I've got 100 million mistakes and lessons learned along the way. But I think if I were probably focused just to talk maybe a little bit more about this from a leadership standpoint, is that um, it's been pretty interesting to through each kind of career transition. One of the things that I think is incredibly important is to be self-aware. Um, you got to be self-aware, one, to continually improve. But when you elevate in your career, you have to be more self-aware because you're no longer the one, you're not an IC, right? You're responsible
Right.
for a thing, or in this case, for me, it's the company as the CEO. So I came into this, and I actually came into the role in kind of a sort of a strange circumstance or a unique circumstance. I I came in to run what is now Sama when it was a nonprofit. We made a decision, the founder and I, that we needed to raise money. If you're familiar with the nonprofit world, I was only corporate before and for profit. I wanted to do this mission driven thing, and but it's technology, so you have to hire engineers. You have
Hmm.
to actually have financing to compete, effectively in technology business. You need to be able to have enough of a war chest to be able to hire engineers and bring in talent, especially in a very competitive space like AI. So, long story short, is we made a decision to transition to for profit so that we could get to the right level of financing that would allow this company to be successful. Because for us, the more we grow, the more jobs we create,
Hmm.
the more people are hired. They're like the mission is completely tied to the better we do,
Hmm.
from a business and growth standpoint. So we did it really thoughtfully and sort of knowingly. And we did it in a structure in which the nonprofit is still our majority shareholder. So
Okay.
we had governance. We have a nonprofit board member who sits and can help make sure that we stay aligned to the mission. We
Okay.
became a public benefit corp, B Corp. We did all these things to like make sure that hey, we could stay to that North Star. And not too long after we went through this and we raised our Series A, our founder got really sick, and she was very young, and she ended up actually passing away within a year of her diagnosis. So I went from being the COO and president of the company to basically into the CEO role. And I mentioned this kind of unique situation because one of the things that was a huge learning about being self-aware was, okay, wow, like I've got to carry forward, Lila's vision. This is really critical. This isn't just some like, no ding on, SaaS startups or whatever, but like this isn't, we've got people relying on us, right, in East
Yeah.
Africa. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with this and to make sure this vision is, upheld. So I came into this sort of in this unique circumstance, but one of the things that kind of taught me was, okay, well, I'm not going to come into this with this huge amount of ego that says, I know everything. Right? I mean, of course I knew about the business. Of course I knew what our differentiators were, which markets we wanted to attack. But coming into this as a new role, I came into it with kind of quite a bit of, self-awareness or humility. So I talked to everybody I could, right? I'm like, hey, what's it like to be a CEO, right? Like, so I
Hmm.
had all of investors get me connected with their portfolio companies. I joined, networking groups. I tried to figure out and learn from people who had done this before, both first time CEOs, because it's the first time for everybody, right?
Hmm.
To multi-time CEOs. Anyways, long story short, it brought me to this practice and this sort of idea of self-awareness, which is, okay, you in a leadership position, and in particular for, I would say, I felt like as a CEO, it's not just who you need to be at the time, it's who you need to be. You need to be the CEO the company needs you to be, not just now, but next year and
Yeah.
the following year, right?
Hmm.
And coming into this with this kind of view of like, okay, hey, I should really take stock of what are the most important aspects of this job. But not only what are the most important aspects of this job, but what about right now on the stage? At that time, we were Series A. Then it became different when we were Series B. Then it became different, at this other stage. So I got into this practice of kind of, sort of firing and rehiring myself, if you will,
Hmm.
to say, okay, well, what does this really need? How do I surround myself with people who can accentuate and complement the strengths or just like, my weaknesses, right? Like what I've
Yeah.
experienced and what I know. And so I would probably say one of the biggest learnings from just like a general leadership and it was coming into a new company, but I'd say even more so was coming into a new role was that exercise. And I think it's one that is incredibly important at any level that you have that you're looking at this and saying, okay, of course there are going to be things that the job demands of me that I might be naturally suited to. What about those things I'm not naturally suited to? How am I going to combat that? How do I be the CEO the company needs me to be? And there's a whole, I'm sure probably, line of discussion from there, but it's everything from like I have been a servant leader, which is not standard for most executives. Okay.
Especially in your area and
Yeah,
and tech.
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really like it's just not it's not sort of normal, or I should say, like
Yeah.
a standard. And so I had known that about myself and I said, okay, I have strong points of view. And the company needs me to be out front. So of course I've got to get out there, have that strong point of view. It doesn't mean that I can't be collaborative. It doesn't mean that I can't elevate, the people that are around me and try to connect the dots and support them. But I also got to be who the company needs me to be. So whether it's in my comfort zone or not, right? And then, how can I augment that? Okay, great. Let me find a great technology leader who I also feel can go and round out the
Hmm.
bench, communicate, well what we're doing. let me find this, let me find that, and to try to piece that together. And then, as the company evolves, much more so than me, well, what's the focus now, right? And I can tell you this year, I'm like, okay, what do we need? It's totally 100% about operational discipline.
Mm,
So I'm going to pull my old COO chops out there, and we are
mm.
going to go hard on the metrics in this discipline. And then here are the other things I'm going to focus on. So anyhow, long-winded answer, but those are some of the big learnings.
I love that, and I love the exercise that you explained of the firing yourself. And so you mentioned that kind of anybody can do that, the firing and hiring of yourself. What kinds of things are you thinking of when you go through that exercise for yourself? Is it how you performed, what that kind of gap analysis of who you are versus where you need to go? Tell me more about it so that that are listening can kind of think about it for their own selves and what they might learn from that exercise.
So I think about it in terms of the role and what the company needs. Okay, it's very similar to like if you do organizational design,
Mhm.
you don't just you're not supposed to start with, well, here's Bob and here's you know Jane and here's the people and let me see if I can figure out something that works with all the different skills and traits. No, you actually say like, well, what does the org need, right? What is the best
Right.
structure to deliver against
Mhm.
this? So that's the approach I try to take is okay, what do we need? What are the most important objectives, both from a performance, business metric standpoint? Where are we lacking? I take a look at that, say, hey, this is what the focus needs to be. Then it's like, okay, well, what am I doing? Of those things that are necessary, where do I have
Mhm.
gaps? What do I need to kind of tune or focus? And would I rehire myself back?
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's really important. Like at the end of the day, the obligation I have is to our constituents in East Africa, to our investors and otherwise. And I would probably be the first one to say, like, hey, if I think, there's somebody out there who can do it better or I'm missing something, I'm obligated. I better figure it out, right? Like what is it that's necessary? So yeah, I think it's a really healthy exercise and you don't have to be the CEO to do that. You could be at any level. It's an exercise I've taken my leadership team through as well, which is, hey, it's not just about what you're doing and it's great, we had a good year or this is good, but where do we need this company to be? And are
Yeah.
you doing those things, right?
Yeah.
And what do we need? And okay, and it can drive different conversations. It can everything from development all the way to, hey, I need to delegate this or I need to bring in
Yeah.
this kind of resource or support.
Yeah. Oh, probably very much needed conversations for lots of things. How do you and your team then make action on some of those developmental opportunities for you? How do you model it for team? And then how do you prioritize their development based on the gaps or the priority areas that they want to focus in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think from a methodology standpoint, we are, I try to resist this. There's a lot of different philosophies about this. I'd be
Mhm.
curious what yours is too, but
Yeah.
I've had mixed success with things like OKRs. Um,
Hmm.
it can be an incredible organizing structure. It can also be this thing where people just feel like it needs to be decomposed down to the nth level, and then by the time you get to the bottom and the individual OKR, you're kind of like, now what were we doing again? Like it's almost constrictive in some ways. So I've tried to take a bit more of a balanced approach, which which I think has worked pretty well, but it ties into then sort of individual development is okay, what do we need to do as a company? There's some top
Hmm.
company level objectives we're trying to
Yep.
do. Obviously, everybody has their performance metrics, right? Their
Mhm.
top line growth, cost controls, profitability, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, hey, here's where we want to be from the numbers. Here's what we think is from a strategy standpoint, the top three things we think we really need to accomplish. Then that cascades, to the department levels where those heads and say, all right, like, how am I going to contribute to these objectives? And I try to keep it there because I feel like if you just keep going down, it gets like overwhelming, especially for, a startup. But from there, when we kind of know, okay, hey, here's where we need to go, this is where then it kind of ties into the personal development side, which is, all right, what are the competencies? What are the development areas? And I try to find I try to find a balance between I gotta call it like the ultimate Venn diagram. Like there's what the
Mhm.
company needs,
Uh-huh.
right? There's what the person wants to do, and then there's what they're good at, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
want to get to that
Yep.
that sort of perfect, kind of bullseye. And sometimes it doesn't color within lines. Sometimes things don't all fit together perfectly. But when we anchor on the what does the company need component of it, then we can come back to, okay, all right, well, how are we doing with this capability? What are the areas we need to develop? And then I one of the things I do like doing, not every year, but I've done it probably now every other year or so. I don't know if there's so many different leadership tools out there, like
Mhm.
there's like Hogan, there's
Mhm.
Insights, there's
Yep.
DISC, there's all those,
Yep.
kinds of different methodologies. And we did one, I don't do it every year, but probably every couple years or so.
Mhm.
We did one this time, which is not exactly like a Myers-Briggs type, but it was really more about what are your natural tendencies.
Mhm.
And so this year I tried to combine these two, and then also said try to include that component of it, which says like, hey, your natural tendency is to do this. So
Mhm.
with what the company needs, like I really need you to stretch
Yeah.
to you're a great at analytics, you know, VP of operations. You're fantastic in analytics, but people need to see your point of view. Your
Mhm.
natural tendency is to be risk averse and let other people make the decisions, right?
Yeah.
You as a leader of the company are more than just your smart brain of doing the analysis. It's about having an opinion because you're part of how we move this forward. So
Mhm.
that's an example of us. Hey, senior natural tendencies are this. This is what we need in the company. I really need you to own this initiative, so I need you to be out in front of people.
Mhm.
So that's a very specific example, but that's how I try to take the combination of what does the company need, what are you good at, and what do we need to do to complement or support you in your development to get better.
I love it. I love it so much. That's a very similar approach to what I generally take as well. What's the organization need? And are there organizational capabilities that we need to build? Or do we need to buy them or do we need to borrow them? Right. So if it's something that we can
Exactly.
build and stretch or is it something that somebody we need to hire, right? Or do we need to hire a consultant, whatever it might be? How fast do we need it? All of those things. But then, like, I love the Venn diagram example. Absolutely. What are you good at? I do use Hogan, so that's the thing that I like to also do is the layer of the team Hogan to just say, hey, what
Mhm.
are our natural tendencies as a team? How does that overlay together? And then what do we need as an organization to move further? And are we getting in our own way? And how do we what do we need to do to change the ways that we work to be in line with our organizational goals and just the makeup of our team?
I think what you just said is like a super important part of it too, which is why I think it's always we gotta start with like what does the company need because it's so often I find this especially with like org structures and stuff is that we get in our own way. It's
Yeah.
like, oh well that's the way we've always that's the way we've always done it, or so and so's always had this like that. The notion of the firing and rehiring was to be able to free yourself from like, oh well, this is, the mode in which we operate, or this is the
Yeah.
structure in which we operate. So, I've got to think within that lane. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it doesn't always match up, right?
It
Like that's
doesn't.
where the borrow, buy, hire, figure out if, the person's a fit, all that kind of stuff comes into play. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about kind of the individual where their energy is or their natural inclinations. Because like you said, like they may be doing something that the organization needs them to do something differently. It doesn't mean that they can't do it. It means that it might take them intentional, practice or to be put on a lead of a project like you explained, or a different critical experience. And that means that they can still grow. And it's a kind of just a growth mindset as well. As you're getting what you need for the organization, but also continuing to develop that person and role.
That's exactly right. Because at the end of the day, whether it's at your company or somewhere else, these are things we're going to have to contend with, right?
Yeah.
So it's excellent to have those discussions. And I found that mostly people are like, yeah, wow, like, thanks for taking a moment to like think about this, to be
Yeah.
thoughtful about it and look at it. And yeah, yeah, I think it's worked well and it creates a great level of alignment. And even in the cases where things work or they don't work out, like, you're talking with that individual. They're like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like I know where the company is going. This fits or this doesn't fit. Yeah.
That's right. And then they can make a decision too if that's not if it doesn't
Totally.
fit for them.
Yeah.
Because we started this conversation with, you needing to be values aligned in your work too. And if you're creating that environment for your team to be values aligned, that is you modeling that for them too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Mm.
100%.
Yeah. So, what are other things you talked about self awareness? Any other important topics or ways that you make sure that you are self aware and are like getting feedback so that you don't have blind spots? Like, what other things are you doing for yourself or with your team?
Yeah, there's so many different avenues to well, let me maybe start by saying I think it's important that you actually get feedback. So let me
Yeah.
start there at the top,
Yeah, I like that. Let's start
which
there. Let's get some feedback. Yeah.
yeah, I think just starting to get feedback is an important thing, and it's really interesting, especially in the world that I'm in, where the feedback from different stakeholders comes in really different forms. I mean, obviously, we have a board, we have investors, they have super strong opinions, they have certain objectives. There's our employees, there are impact associates, other stakeholders, you name it. So I think the first is recognize that feedback is important. There are all sorts of ways to get it, but I think the way that I found to be most helpful is I'll maybe give just to turn this into something that's actually like a practical couple different practical actions. So for the company, of course, we do employee engagement surveys. It's
Mhm.
all anonymized. We do small group feedback sessions. There's all sorts of things like that to ensure that there is feedback coming. We do benchmarks, like using software like Culture Amp as an example. So all that stuff is, I think, the pretty normal stuff. There's 360s. But one of the exercises I've liked to do with my leadership team,
Mhm.
and it can be done well in a facilitated environment. I'm really big on this concept of first team.
Yeah, yeah. Explain that to folks that don't know what first team is.
So I, as a CEO, I don't have a first team.
Mhm.
The first team that my direct reports off is each other. So my management team, they are each other's first team, and that means that they should be working to support the collective objectives and the needs of each other first. And so I've done
Instead of their own direct reports and
instead
their
of their
their
own direct
line
reports. Yeah,
team. Okay.
exactly. So they should be I don't know if catering is the right word, but they should be really thinking about their first team of stakeholders exactly, as opposed to, oh well, I represent marketing, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look at the things that my marketing team demands or needs. It's like, no, your first team is the
Mm-hmm.
management team, because guess what? Our objective isn't to make sure that marketing does great and we've got a great brand or a good bunch of leads that never convert. We need
Mm-hmm.
the company as a whole to be successful. So we have
Right.
one common set of goals. So I very much believe in the first team concept. All of my management team, including myself, we all have the same objective, the same way in which we're being measured. We just
Okay.
bonus structure, like everybody knows, like, hey, this is what we're doing, and it's to create collective action. Now, with that said, your question was about feedback, and I think feedback is incredibly important. My lead up to this is that your feedback from your first team is incredibly important, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's equivalently, maybe more even important than the feedback I may give to my direct reports. I do those different coaching techniques. It's incredibly important to get 360 and upward feedback as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one of the best texts I found is going through an exercise where, in a very safe environment, I guess is what I would describe, because it's incredibly important that you build, trust, and there are many different ways in which you can kind of begin to build that trust. But a lot of it comes with, just letting people know each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
The example I always like to use is that, if you're, driving behind somebody and, they slam on their brakes, you can get really upset and kind of road rage, right? And be like, oh my God, I can't believe that person wasn't paying attention, or maybe they're on their phone. But if you knew it was your grandma, you'd be like, oh, she probably, there was a dog that went into the road. You give them the benefit of the doubt,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And so building that trust is really important so that you have that kind of benefit of the doubt amongst your team. But what I've done before, I don't do it like every quarter. I think it's just like way too much. But maybe once a year or so, we do it, and we do it in conjunction with like a dinner. But each person says it comes together with feedback, but that is both positive and constructive for each one
Mm-hmm.
of their first team members. you have to be really careful how you do it to make sure that, like, again,
Yeah.
people feel safe, but that feedback to understand how you're doing. And I always go first, right? It's like,
Mhm.
pile it on, right? Pile it on to
Yeah.
me first. But it's so incredibly helpful to get that peer feedback because done thoughtfully, it's in the contract of, hey, what does the company need and how do we advance forward? And everybody gets the feedback equally. So it's
Yeah.
not like everybody gets something positive, everybody gets something constructive,
Hmm.
and you start to see themes emerge.
Hmm.
And then the individual who gets that feedback, it's such a valuable gift because they're like, holy cow, like I didn't know I did that. And also like, oh, well, holy cow, like you think I do these things really great. So it's this
Hmm.
really I found that to be an exercise that when done right can be incredibly powerful for feedback. So
I love that so much. And I would say the first team concept is hard for a lot of organizations. It people get stuck, and I've as an executive coach and facilitator, I'm often talking to companies and senior leadership teams about their leaders needing to be enterprise thinkers, right? To be thinking about the whole business, which is another way of saying first team, not as well, but because first team also inspires that trust, and you do have that like that ability to even give the feedback. I would tell you some of the places where I have worked, and even some of the people that I coach, they wouldn't be able to give their peers that feedback because they don't even know them that well, because they're siloed, and they're a part of a leadership team, and they're peers, but they're not in each other's worlds unless they're in that once every other week meeting with their peers that it may be a great meeting, it may not be, right? Depending on how they run it and how connected they are, but often they're not very interconnected. And so I think that is one of the like the biggest differences between kind of high performing teams and not, is that idea of first team, the connection and the trust that you can build. So yeah, I love that exercise, but I love that you also say in a safe place, because not all teams would be able to do that, because they may not know their peers as
well,
well
exactly.
to
And you
give
might
that
be,
feedback.
yeah,
It wouldn't feel safe.
you might feel like you're stepping on toes, which is why like the build up to that is just that's why I use the like, what if somebody slammed on their brakes in front of you example,
Yeah.
and almost everybody gets it. And so we've used like some of the table group techniques and things like that,
Hmm.
but exercises to get to know each other, like one that I always love and I typically have like new team members do. It's
Hmm.
like a lifeline exercise. So you just build
Wow.
a slide, right? And you kind of like, here are the things that have influenced my life
Hmm.
positively and negatively. But, all of a sudden it's like, wow, like humans want connection. They want
I
to
do.
figure out things that you've got in common and you can just break that down just a little bit and little exercises like that. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, like, yeah, we are all on the same team. And then when it
Hmm.
comes to like, hey, we're looking for this revenue growth, but what it's really going to take is it's going to take this new product solution. You need your product and technologists to come in and saying, yeah, we can absolutely do it. You need your marketing people say, well, this is what the market's demanding. And your salespeople saying, oh, I feel enabled. I can go sell this. I can just sell the hell out of it, right? So that connection and setting that North Star and everybody knowing, hey, we're all in the same boat is
Yeah.
like so, so huge. So
Mm.
from both a feedback standpoint and just how to run the teams, I think that's probably one of the absolute most important things you can do.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to bring it back to values, and just I think that's another important place where people can find connection sometimes too. You mentioned the lifeline exercise where you kind of talk about the ups and downs and the impacts, and even how you've maybe formed your values. And I've found that through connecting on personal values, which we kind of talked about, they're kind of your life values. I have one set of values. I think we're whole people. And so I have one set of values inside and out of work. Some people have a different perspective, but sharing and connecting on that, or the North Star, whether that is mission, vision, or values, and how everybody's kind of interconnected, is also another point where people can find alignment in lots of ways. Or even it's a great way to talk about why we think differently too, and how that diversity makes us a really great team as well, to get to that North Star, and what the business needs and what you need personally.
100%. And I think the values piece of this is so critical because at the end of the day, I mean, I know when I do my hiring, like to a certain extent, like you wouldn't even be in the picture if you weren't qualified in some way. You've clearly
Right.
got, your between your talent acquisition teams, knowing what you
Hmm.
need as a company, bringing in diverse candidates. I'm a huge believer in that. Like you got to go outside of just the people that you might typically find. You bring all that together, and at the end of the day, it's about the values. The very first thing is the
Yes.
cultural and values alignment. So we absolutely, I mean, yes, we've got a winning aspiration. Yes, we know what we want to do. We've got performance metrics and a company scorecard, but we also have really well articulated values. If you can't get aligned with that, so for example, one of our values is humanity.
Mm.
It's tied in directly to our social mission. I feel like if somebody doesn't even have an affinity or even get it, they're not going to be a fit.
Yeah.
Like another is really customer first. Well, she said, if you can't put yourself in the customer's shoes, like that is what we're doing. It's a value exchange. How are we going to be aligned, right? And so I think the values part is very important. And I found that all of our absolute best hires, the ones that are good fits, one, they know what they're coming into, the good, bad, and the ugly. But
Hmm.
very importantly, they're aligned to the values. Because you can't get behind that, you can't get behind customer delivery, like accountability, whatever it might be, humanity, then I think it's going to be a tough road. So
Yeah, it is. And I think like you said, it starts at the interview phase. And then when it is a values alignment, then that helps in onboarding, that helps in development, that helps in like all of those things and employee engagement, fulfillment, retention, all of the stuff. But it starts there.
100%. It's like, do you want people who want to walk through walls for you, or do you want people who are phoning it in? I mean,
Yeah.
I think I know which one I want, right? And that's
Yeah.
one of the key critical parts of this alignment is you got to get to that same Venn diagram. People want to be here. They want to believe in what they're doing and understand their contribution to it. And if you can't help articulate that or even know when it's not a fit, it's sure you get somebody phoning it in, but it's very different than when somebody wants to walk through walls for you,
That's right. That's
company.
absolutely right. Yeah, the values alignment is powerful and it benefits the individual and it absolutely benefits organizations as well. Well, Wendy, I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. I loved all of it. I loved getting to know you and I loved hearing from your experience and your philosophy. And I'm just so happy that we were able to share the same space today.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it.
So, what is the best way for folks to stay connected to you?
Probably through LinkedIn. That's the
Perfect.
easiest way. So
Okay.
happy to
Awesome.
share.
Well, I will ensure that we share that in the show notes. And just thank you so much for your thought leadership today and for sharing your experiences.
Appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, leaders, I am back to talk about how this conversation from Wendy can be applied in your life and career, regardless of your role. Right now, more than ever, the world needs your leadership. You heard firsthand how Wendy's values show up in her life and work, and especially in how she leads her team. Here are some questions I would love for you to reflect on. How do your values show up in your leadership style? How are you modeling your values to your peers and your team? What resonated with you most in my conversation from Wendy? Was it the notion of a first team, the idea of values alignment, or did you resonate with firing yourself every year? What was your biggest takeaway? And lastly, who might you share this episode with that you think could benefit from it? As always, I have lots of tools available for you and your team to answer some of these questions and then some. If you haven't already, download the Values First workbook, which is the companion workbook for my book, Values First, or the Values First discussion guide. That's available on my website to download for free too at thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst. In that book, I share how to find clarity in your values, how to utilize them in your everyday leadership, and how to get more closely aligned to your values in life and work. I love partnering with leaders who are developing themselves and their teams. Please reach out to me for collaboration or partnership for executive coaching. team facilitation, or speaking. And you can do that by emailing hello@thecatchgroup.com or on my website. Remember, your leadership belongs here. You belong in the C-suite. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.